Hi everyone, welcome to the October 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week on the podcast we'll be taking a look at Saturday's late pick 5 sequence at Keeneland. Really interesting group of races. I know that Craig and I already talked about a couple of them in our DRF Stakes previews this week, both of the stakes events that are part of this pick 5 sequence, the Perryville at 7 furlongs for the 3-year-olds and the Raven Run for the fillies going that same distance. Those are both intriguing races, but the surrounding non-stakes events, Craig, they're also pretty interesting. And to help us handicap this week, we're bringing in a third voice, and hopefully that helps us get a handle on this sequence.
Yeah, it's a very good card. You usually don't get this kind of quality right before the Breeders' Cup, but both here and I know we talked offline, Belmont have fabulous betting cards on Saturday, so really looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we're bringing in a guest handicapper this week, something that I know that Craig and I have done independently, and one of us is out. We've brought in some guests to fill in for each other, but this is the first time that we're going to make it a trio on the TimeformUS Forecast, and I'm happy to welcome in Michael Domabyl, who does some focusing on Keeneland for In the Money Media. I know that he does write-ups for Keeneland sequences every day. So, Michael, welcome to the podcast, and tell people a little bit about what kind of work you're doing and how you got into racing.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm excited to be on. Listen to you guys every week, so this will save me some time over the weekend getting to participate with you guys. So over at In the Money Media, inthemoneypodcast.com, I've been writing up the analysis on the Turf Pick 3 that Keeneland introduced this meet, the $3 minimum wager, linking the last 3 turf races on the Keeneland card every day. It's a cool wager that's got a lot of things that horse players love, a high minimum to take some of the efficiency out of the computer wagering teams, as well as a low takeout, just 15% takeout, which is lower than a lot of the takeouts in the pick 3. So I've been covering that every day of the meet and excited to jump in and look at these pick 5 races as well.
Yeah, I've read some of your analysis. I like the way that you dissect the sequences. I think, you can really anchor those around certain horses. As you said, it's a really high minimum, so makes the barrier to entry a little bit higher for the low-level players. And interesting sequences. I like the way you take them apart, so interested to get your take on some of these races. And let's just start by diving in, because there's a lot to talk about through these 5 races. We begin with race 6. This pick 5 sequence does span races 6 through 10. The 6th is an optional claiming 62,000. Nometers of 2 other than the allowance condition, going 1 mile and a 16th on the dirt course at Keeneland. One of the shorter fields that we have in this pick 5 sequence with just 7 signed on. And the morning line favorite is Mystic Knight, who goes out for Chad Brown, a horse that's run some of the fastest speed figures in this race, but he's already lost for this condition a couple times in the past at short prices, so you're going to have to swallow another short price on him again as he tries to break through this condition. There are some other horses in here that definitely have the speed figures and the class to contend. It's just a matter of whether they're winning types and can get the job done. Craig, I'll start with you because we haven't talked about this race yet. Where were you looking to go here?
Well, I can tell you where I'm not looking to go first off, and that's with Beau Luminary, the number 2 horse. And it's not that he doesn't have the speed figures to compete. It's just that he never seems to win. His 2 wins have come when he had that big maiden win a while back, and he also won one on the synthetic when he was 2-5. But otherwise, he just has a long string of second and third. So at a short price, he's one I definitely want to keep off my ticket. My main contender and the horse I'm going to key on, I'm not going to single him because I will use some others, is drawn on the outside, and that's Candy Tycoon. This is just a race where I'm relying on the pace projector. There's not a lot of speed in here. He is jumping up in class from a claiming race at Saratoga where he was claimed from Todd Pletcher by Norm Cass. But he ran a couple nice speed figures his last couple times out. And with the pace advantage, I think he is the horse to beat more so than Mystic Knight.
Yeah, based on that pace projector, he definitely does look to have that tactical advantage in here because the horses to his inside, they're just not that fast. So you figure that Tyler Gaffaleone's going to be able to get to the front end with him. Michael, how did you see this one?
Yeah, I think Mystic Knight is a deserved favorite, especially due to the fact that last weekend of Saratoga, I know, David, you've talked about this a lot, that closing weekend of Saratoga, it was kind of tough to make up ground on the dirt. especially going 2 turns. And the race Mystic Knight comes out of was wired by Thomas Shelby. So I think he's a deserved favorite. It is a little bit questionable how much pace he'll get today. The TimeformUS pace projector's got that blue coating on it. And so Candy Tycoon would be the logical beneficiary of that. So I think Mystic Knight is the horse to beat, and I'd be using him prominently in any pick 5 that I play. But one horse that I would want to throw in at a bit of a price that, either as a backup or on some smaller tickets on the A line is the inside horse 20 Twice. So Jack Sisterson's really, he'll come and pop up with a price at times, especially with these horses that, are lightly raced and can figure to cash in on some of that upside they have. And last out at Churchill, it's fitting I'm on the TimeformUS forecast because I'm a big TimeformUS user. The September 17th card at Churchill is coded in bright red. And I think if the algorithm had a maroon to it, that's probably what would be coded on September 17th at Churchill, just because it was an absolute speed highway. And 20 Twice was all the way in the back of the pack. It made a little bit of a middle move coming into the stretch, but now it gets to cut back to 8.5 furlongs. And I think, these Jack Sisterson runners can pop up, and at a big price, why not include 20 Twice as well?
I'm glad you brought that horse up because I was not going to highlight him here. He's a horse that I gave a long look to when I was handicapping this race because I saw all the things that you did. I was trying to make a case for him. Ultimately, I was a little bit afraid of the pace scenario here because he's kind of a plotter and I wasn't sure that he'd get the right pace set up in this spot. But I saw everything that you did in the last race and I think he's likely to move forward. I just wonder if this is the right spot with the 1.16 configuration and this short stretch at Keeneland. He's going to have to work out a trip, but I mean, he's a big price in here, so I'm not going to try to talk anybody off of him. Yeah, I reluctantly kind of went more in Craig's direction in this race and landed on Candy Tycoon. I don't have anything really against Mystic Knight other than the fact that watching that last race, while I agree that it was dominated on the front end by Thomas Shelby, and I still thought Mystic Knight had his chance. Rail runners seemed to do well in that race, and I just didn't like the way that he didn't finish off that race in the final eighth of a mile. It looked like he was going to finish second, clear by a couple of lengths coming past the eighth pole, and he just really shut down in the final furlong and almost got beat for second by You're to Blame, who is a good horse in his own right. I just didn't think that Mystic Knight should have been losing ground at the end of that race, so I'm a little bit leery of him at a short price, and I do think he'll get bet here. I agree with everything Craig said about Bo Limonari. He can win this race, just doesn't really have a winning profile. And, Candy Tycoon, he's not a horse that I really have ever loved, but he ran well enough last time, albeit against weaker company at Saratoga. Not sure that the rail was the best place to be when he ran on that September 2nd card, and he was right down inside almost the entire way. A legitimate DQ, but I thought he ran reasonably well that day from a speed figure standpoint. It's not like he's that far off some of these other ones, and given the trip that he's likely to pull, I think he might just be able to get it done even if he isn't the best horse in this race. So I kind of reluctantly went in his direction, but I would use a horse like Mystic Knight as a distant backup. Even a horse like Bourbon Calling I don't think is impossible here, and I'd use him maybe as a B in an ABC type of wager. But this is one where I would try to go somewhat thin and focus on Candy Tycoon because I think there are places to spread a little bit later in this sequence.
Yeah, I'm actually going to use Mystic Knight as well. If you look at the chart of his last race at Saratoga, that's actually proven to be a really productive race. The horses that finished behind him in third and fourth have come back to run first and second. And even a couple of the horses that were way back in the field, locally owned, came back with a really big win. And First Constitution had a nice third with a much improved speed figure. So I can't leave him off my ticket. And I actually am using the same horse that Michael went with, 20 Twice, as well as kind of my price play in here. For all the reasons mentioned, no reason to rehash all those. But the one thing that I do like is he ran pretty good speed figures as a 3-year-old in the mid-hundreds. So now he's a much later 4-year-old. So if he does run his race, he could easily run numbers in the 1 teens.
Let's move on to the second leg of this pick 5 sequence. It is the first stakes on this card at Keeneland on Saturday, the Perryville for 3-year-olds going 7 furlongs. We've got a field of 9 signed on, and Craig, I know this is the one that we already talked about on our stakes preview, and we kind of had a similar view of this race, so I'm going to throw it to Michael first to see where he wants to go here, because Michael, it seems like this is a pretty competitive race. We've got Soup and Sandwich down towards the rails coming out of the Kentucky Derby, but there are plenty of other horses that are stepping up in class that certainly have the speed figures to get into the mix at this level.
Yeah, this is a fun little stakes race. It's nice to see Soup and Sandwich back. I know the Gray Colt's a fan favorite of many based on his looks and his name, but I'll play against him a little bit in this spot. Cassie doesn't have the best numbers off of this type of layoff on the dirt, and especially route to sprint. But so I think Pipeline is really the horse to beat here, and I think it would be pretty surprising if he ends up at the 4-1 morning line co-third choice that he is ahead of the race. I think he'll be closer to the 2-1 range. But he's really just been a new horse since the blinkers were put on, 2 back at Saratoga. And that was going 2 turns in that demanding 1 1/8 distance at the Spa. And he's probably shaped more like a 7 furlong horse and confirmed that with his pretty dominant maiden score last time out, where he beat Cody's Wish, who came back to win. I was a little disappointed to see that Waxman didn't really run back at Keeneland very well, but I won't hold that one piece against Pipeline, who I think is the most talented runner in the field. And then the other one I would want to use at a bit of a price is the number 9, Runway Magic, because kind of a similar thought process. The blinkers turned him around as well. And, the Drury Barn hits at a high percentage, and cutting back from a mile to 7 furlongs seems like a good prospect for this horse, and he showed the ability to run pretty high speed figures as a late season 2-year-old. So I think at 12-1 morning line, he'd be interesting as well. And then the last horse I'll mention would just be Cool Quest, because the story's similar again. First time dirt on the blinkers, he popped his best race, wiring the field. Now there's a little bit more speed signed on, but I wonder if Irish Unity will end up he might be a little bit off form and may not have that same early speed that he's had in the past. So if Cool Quest can pop out of the gate like he did in his last race, he could take a wire to wire too.
Well, Craig, I'll throw it to you next, but having already discussed this race with you, I feel like Michael probably already made a lot of the points that you want to hit on.
He did. Basically, he picked the same horse as I did. Pipeline, we saw the same things. The addition of blinkers has turned him into a new horse. Cool Quest ran that big maiden race. The one thing I'll say about the Pipeline race, while Waxman didn't come back and run very well and didn't flatter Pipeline, the third place finisher Cody's Wish did. He came back and backed up that speed figure with a win. Actually improved 5 points up to a 116. So I think it's a pretty strong, productive race. The one horse that I do want to mention that I'm not going to play is Pickin' Time. He's a horse who has a gaudy looking speed figure in that second to Jackie's Warrior, but I just thought it was an absolute perfect setup for him. It was just a 5-horse field, and there were 4 speed horses, and 3 of them just basically blew it chasing Jackie's Warrior, had nothing left in the stretch, and Pickin' Time was just able to pick up the pieces. So I don't think he's not going to be on my ticket as a 7-2 morning line second choice. And similar with Soup and Sandwich, as we know in our preview, I basically showed the exact same stat Michael was talking about. It's not a strong point for Mark Cassie, so not interested in him at all.
Yeah, we're all kind of heading in the same direction in this race. I agree with what Michael said about Pipeline, and particularly his price in this race. I feel like he's going to get bat down off that 4-1 morning line, and he probably deserves to, because he comes in with some of the highest speed figures in the field. I don't really care about the fact that he's moving up out of maiden races, because those seem like pretty strong races that he's exiting. The one thing I'm concerned about with Pipeline is the trip that he might pull here. I don't totally agree that he's going to be as far back as he's shown on the pace projector, because I think that's influenced a little bit by the fact that he ran on turf and went longer, not just based on the 7 furlong race that he ran last time, but there are some quick horses in here. It's not just the 7 and 8. I mean, Boca Boy, I feel like he has to go from the inside, and he's a pretty quick horse that I think might be most likely to make the lead in this race. So we'll see how it plays out and where Pipeline's able to slot in, but I know that he's a horse that this Bard has thought highly of from the start of his career. Just took him a few starts to figure things out, the addition of blinkers, and just seems like he's in great form right now. So I think he's one that definitely merits respect, and I agree with what Michael said. My top pick in this race would be the number 9, Runway Magic. I just kind of leaned in his direction due to the fact that he's likely to get somewhat ignored on the board with so much money likely to go to some horses with prior class like Pick and Time and Soup and Sandwich. And Runway Magic is a horse that I've kind of had a thing for a while now. I briefly wanted him to become a Derby horse when I liked him in the Sam F. Davis last year. Obviously, that didn't really work out, but I think he's proven over time that going one turn on the dirt is just what he wants to do. This son of Run Happy, and I liked his race last time at Churchill Downs when he was right up close to an honest pace and finished it off well. Speed figure is just slightly off some of these other ones, but I think he can take that step forward, and he has shown the versatility to come from a little further off the pace in the past. So I made him my top pick here, but I would also use Pipeline prominently. I wasn't as big a fan of Cool Quest. I respect Soup and Sandwich, but kind of want to see a race from him, so I would mostly focus on those two in the Perryville. Michael and Craig, was there anybody else that you wanted to mention in this race?
For me, nobody else I wanted to mention. Runway Magic, I do think, has a shot, as I mentioned on the preview. You make a really good point about the pace projector, so something I want to bring up for those using it. Pipeline is a horse who, when we look at them, we look at the last 5 races and we use the best 3. So when you have a horse that shows a sudden change like he did with the addition of blinkers, it's going to take a little while to capture that. So just something for our users to think about when you see a horse that far back and realize that it's something maybe we could program in. It might be a little tough. Maybe it's something I'll work on over the winter. But when there's some kind of change, I mean, be it maybe the horse improves taking blinkers off or adding Lasix or whatever it happens to be, or even just the trainer change sometimes can throw the pace projector into disarray for a horse. So I think that was the case with Pipeline, and it is just a starting point, so use your own judgments, and this is a case where I would definitely have Pipeline much closer up than he's shown.
All right, let's move on to the next leg of the sequence, race 8. And personally for me, when I was doing some handicapping, I found this to be the most difficult race of the sequence. I had a really tough time narrowing it down. I have no idea how the public's going to bet this race, and it's kind of difficult to really latch on to any contender and say, I love this horse in this spot, because it just looks so competitive and the form is kind of muddled. Craig, I'll start with you because I want to talk about the TimeformUS pace projector here. Anytime that I see that fast pace flag in a turf route, I always approach it with a little bit of skepticism because it seems like the riders often don't ride the speed horses to their best effect that way. But in this one, it seems like the pace has to be honest, because there are so many horses that want to be forwardly placed in this spot.
Yeah, that was my thought exactly as well. It looks like it is just definitely going to be a legitimate fast pace, and it's an interesting situation in the 2 horses shown up on the front, dueling for the lead, are 2 horses who I really wouldn't consider contenders. So I'm not so sure it will affect any of the horses really in behind that are contenders in this race. I just think it makes it more honest, and you can kind of evaluate the horses on their merits and not have to worry about whether they're going to be pace compromised. Now, it is a big field of 12, so you could get a trip problems, if horses bunch up. But when the pace is fast, it tends to spread the horses out a little bit. So I think this is a case where you can look for the best horse. I'll just start out with the horse I landed on as my top pick and turn it over to you guys. The horse I landed on was Mr. Dumas. He's a horse who has run some really nice speed figures in the past. He had a long layoff. He did change from the barn of Michael Maker. He moved into the barn of John Ortiz, and he hasn't shown that same form, but I'm a little dubious we saw the best from him either time. His return race at Colonial, he was on the lead, a place he's never really been before. especially in turf races. So I don't think he was particularly comfortable, and he didn't run terrible. He was only beaten about 5 lengths after leading that race a long way. And then last time they put him in the ACAC, he hadn't been on the dirt in a long, long time, since his first 3 career races. Showed speed that day and backed up, but I think any kind of return to the form we saw in his prior season last year would be good enough to win. He's won over this Keeneland course with a huge speed figure, and I just think he has really good tactical speed. He can tuck in behind those speed horses, get a good trip from his fairly inside post, and I think he's got a big shot.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Dumas is definitely a contender for me in this race. I saw everything you did in that race too back when, watching that race at Colonial, he just kind of ran off with Julian Pimentel and just seemed like he couldn't really get a hold of him, and he just dropped his hands and let him go. He's been much more aggressive in the early stages since the trainer switch back to John Ortiz. So, make of that what you will. I doubt he's on the lead in this race given how much other speed there is. But, going out for this barn with Raylu Gutierrez aboard, it feels like you are going to get a decent price on him in this race. So I agree. He's one that I could definitely make a case for. Michael, I want to know where you went in here. The morning line maker has Big Agenda at 5-2 as kind of a decisive morning line favorite in this race. I can't say that I necessarily saw it that way. Maybe Big Agenda is just kind of finally figured out how to win for the Mike Maker barn, but I thought this was a pretty big step up in class for this horse, and I wanted to look elsewhere. How did you see this one?
Yeah, I think the conversation does begin with Big Agenda because, going through this field a few times actually, because it is quite a headache of a race, just with how many different ways there are to go. I think the public could kind of default to Big Agenda, coming off a win. Maker and Gaffleone has been red hot this meet, and when those two team up, they're always dangerous. So I think he might be close to that 5-2 morning line, and that's a little bit of an underlay for me. And I'm going to play this race like the pace is going to melt down, because there's just too many horses that do their best running either outright on the front or right up on the front end stalking the pace, that I want to pick a horse that's going to be closing from the back of the pack. And there's quite a few different places that you could land. English V has some back class for Grand Motion, got back on track at Colonial Downs last time. He's been proven to run in stakes races, in which this could be close to that level of a race with the conditions that are set forth. Spectacular Gem, also another one with back races, the number 9. Second time for Brendan Walsh, got the ultimate equipment change after disappointing in his return race, but maybe he can get back to some of his best races for a dangerous barn, and he's shown the ability to be at least a little bit off the pace and close down fields. But the more I looked at this race, the more I wanted to find a horse that is going to be a little bit of a fuzzy, because there's just so many of these horses. You've seen what their abilities are, and they're pretty exposed at this point. So I'm going to try to make a case for the number 2, Beat LeBone. So Nacho Correas doesn't have great numbers first time North America, and that certainly was what happened with Beat LeBone in the last race at Kentucky Downs. But his overseas form is not that bad. You've got his race 3 back, or his race 4 back his race 3 back at Ascot in a 30-horse field was pretty solid. Real World, who won that race, has gone on to do a lot of great things, won 3 stakes since. And in that race, it's worth watching because Beat LeBone was on the far side of the field where they split into 2 groups, and Real World just ran away with that race on that side. And Beat LeBone was off kind of paddling in his own wake because there was no other horse on that side to run with him. And then his last race, it was kind of too slow of a pace. And if you look at the TimeformUS figures he's been receiving overseas, they're right there with some of the main contenders in this race. And at 30-1 morning line, he might break slowly, but that might not be to his detriment in a field that there's a lot of early pace signed on.
Well, you stole my thunder a little bit with Beat LeBone, because I like the same horse in here. I like all the points that you made about his European form. I saw a lot of the same things, and I think he definitely is a contender based on that alone. And I'll just add to what you said that race he comes out of, the TVG Stakes at Kentucky Downs, he just never had a chance to really get involved in there. I mean, first of all, that was a pretty strong field. Obviously, In Love came back to win the Grade 1 at Keeneland next time pretty impressively, and there were some good horses scattered in behind him there, and there just wasn't a whole lot of movement going on from way back in the pack where he was early in that race, because he was really far back after getting off to a slow start. And I think that's the one concern with Beat Le Bon, that he's just not a horse that has the ability to get out of the starting gate particularly fast. But maybe that doesn't matter here if they go very quickly up front. He wants to be coming from that far back. And in that race at Kentucky Downs, he just never really got a chance to get into the race. I didn't think Leparoux rode him with that much urgency that day, kind of like they almost knew he needed the race there. So I expect him to put in a better effort here, getting Lasix for the first time. I don't know if we're going to get that 30-1, but he does feel like a horse that at the very least is going to be in that 15-1 to 20-1 range. So I agree. There's a lot to like about him as one of the prices in this race. I would also throw out another name that could come in from off the pace, and that's the number 7, Argentello. He's been facing better horses in his recent races. I didn't think he ran that badly behind that same horse, In Love, in the Keeneland Turf Mile last time. Coming back on relatively short rest just 2 weeks later, but he was far back the entire way, kind of got spun wide coming into the stretch, and Brian Hernandez, rode him like he never knew he was really getting much that day. He's in a much more realistic spot this time, and this is a horse that does have back speed figures that puts him in the mix here. So he's another one that's going to get plenty of pace to close into that I would use in this spot. Craig, I do want to get your take on a horse that I was kind of struggling with in this race, and that's the number 11, Busy Channel, who ran some big speed figures at Arlington over the summer, running against 2 Emmys, actually beating that horse twice. And of course, 2 Emmys is the one that went on to beat Domestic Spending in the former Arlington Million, the Mr. D Stakes. He kind of fell apart at Kentucky Downs last time. What do you make of Busy Channel in here? Because on his best race, he arguably is the horse to beat in here.
He is. It's funny you brought that up because he's actually the PPs I have right in front of me as I'm looking, because I'm still puzzled with what to do with this horse. But eventually I just decided that there's so much speed in here. He's drawn outside that he's either going to get caught wide trying to get good position, or he's just going to have to go too fast. I don't hold the race at Kentucky Downs against him. A lot of horses just don't run there. It was a much stronger race than what this one is, and it wouldn't surprise me if he won. But I mean, you can't use every horse in here, and I'm with you guys. I'd rather go with some of the closers. Beat Le Bon is a horse who is on my list. Argentello, Spectacular Gem, and maybe even a little bit of Hierarchy. I was a little concerned when I first saw his PPs that he was dropping from 1.5 miles, but he's run well at 1 mile before. He won a race early this year at Churchill, closing it into a pretty quick pace that day. So he has an inside position. So for me, this is definitely a spread race, but ultimately I decided not to use Busy Channel.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways you can go in here. We'll come back to this one at the end when we talk a little bit about how we would construct these tickets, because I think this is one that you do have to make some decisions in, which horses you want to highlight, which you want to downgrade and fade a little bit. For me, I'd probably want to fade Big Agenda just a little bit if he is that strong favorite in the betting, because I think there are too many other ways to go at big prices in here. And this could be the key race in the sequence that really makes a juicy payout if you get one of those home. Let's move on to race 9, the Grade 2 Raven Run, the feature race at Keeneland on Saturday and the penultimate leg of this Pick 5 sequence. Again, we're going 7 furlongs on the dirt here like the other stakes on the card, though this one for the 3-year-old fillies. And Michael, I'll start with you. I think that the clear horse to beat in this spot is the one all the way on the outside, the number 13, Obligatory. I'd imagine she's going to get bet down a little bit off that 3-1 morning line. This is one that they arguably could have opted to run in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint with, because she does have that kind of form at her best, and just feels like they took the easier route, and maybe she's catching the right field of 3-year-old fillies here.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, because right after they crossed the wire in the Cotillion, I tweeted out that if I'm playing in the Breeders' Cup betting challenge, a lot of my money in the contest would be going through Obligatory in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. So I feel kind of obligated, no pun intended, to bet her back in this spot. The 13 horse field and what's probably going to be bet down off the 3-1 morning line is definitely no bargain, but you got to think she's going to get some pace to run into in this bulky field. And the TimeformUS pace projectors got a red bar coding indicating that'll be the case. And and Obligatory's got the fastest late pace rating on the TimeformUS speed figures by 20 points. So I really can't resist that kind of setup for a horse that I think has an abundance of talent. And I think this could just be a springboard to a really lucrative 4-year-old campaign. So I think this is a race where, it's a 13-horse field. There's a few different interesting alternatives to her, where if you get pretty skinny with Obligatory, and then there's probably one other that I would mention, but you guys can touch on it as well, that you can create some value in a 13-horse field by really narrowing it down to just a couple contenders.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Even though it's a 13-horse field, there is a lot of filler in this race, horses that I wouldn't really count as contenders. And I think once you narrow down to just the contenders, you've got maybe 5 or 6 horses to consider from that original 13. Craig, I know that we already talked about this race on our stakes preview. We agree Obligatory, the horse to beat in here. I know there's another one that you like a little bit that might just be coming back to the right configuration after not getting a good trip last time.
Yeah, that's the number 8 Caramel Swirl. Like you, Obligatory, I think, is a must-use in this spot. But I don't want to rely solely on what's probably going to be a deep closer in a dirt sprint race. She could win, but she's going to be a short price. So I'm going to look at Caramel Swirl as an alternative to win this race. I loved her race at Saratoga, where she got that 115 TimeformUS speed figure. Talked about it on the preview, where it kind of sticks out from her other races, and maybe you think the speed figure isn't very good. But when you pull up the chart and look, it's been a really strong race. All the horses in there have run back to what they ran that day. So I think her regression last time was more a factor of the trip she got in the Charlestown Oaks. That's, as most people know, just a 3/4 mile track. The rail is always good. It was probably particularly good on Charlestown Classic night. And Caramel Swirl was really gunned from the gate to try to get the lead, but she was just outrun by some quicker horses. She wasn't able to get there. We have the pace figure as a 138, and she wound up getting hung about 3 wide going into the turn, and she stayed there the whole way around. So I don't really hold that against her that she faded late. She was just against the track. There were actually some pretty nice horses showed up that day. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Pauline's Pearl, who has since come back to run a good race out of that one, a good second at a longer distance. So I just think that her form is dirtied up a little bit, and that 115 she ran, she could get the jump on a horse like Obligatory, and I think she's going to be a factor in here.
Yeah, my one concern with Caramel Swirl, which I mentioned when we did this race on the stakes preview, was that her 2 big wins have come in slow-paced situations when she's been right on the pace, and I'm a little bit concerned that she's not going to be able to adapt to coming from farther off the pace in here. Maybe it was just the wrong situation when she tried it in the 8 Bells. She didn't run well that day, coming back on relatively short rest, so I guess you can give her a pass for that, and you made, I think, what are valid excuses for her Charlestown race last time. So, I don't want to be too hard on her for both of those losses. I just had some questions. But I do think she's going to drift up a little bit off that 7-2 morning line. I have to imagine there's going to be a much bigger gap between she and Obligatory, because I think Obligatory's form is just more immediately appealing. So I would anticipate that you'll get a better price than that. I went in a slightly different direction in this race. I'm intrigued by a horse that's coming in from Woodbine. That's the number 11 Miss Speedy, one of 2 Mark Casse tradies in this race. I think that his other horse, Super Sensational, is going to take a little bit more money, and she's a contender in this race. But I'm intrigued by Miss Speedy. She's never been on the dirt, but I think she's shown some real ability racing on the Tapeta up north. She made her debut for a different trainer sprinting and showed the ability to come from off the pace, but ever since then, she's just been a one-dimensional speed horse, and she does have the tendency to want to run off a little bit in the beginning of her races. We saw that 2 back when they tried to go 2 turns with her, and she just got way too aggressive on the front end, ran some crazy early pace figures if you look at the TimeformUS PPs. So no surprise that she kind of fell apart at the end of that race, but I liked the way that she adapted to turning back to a sprint last time. She relaxed a little bit better on the lead and was able to finish off that race. The runner-up, Og Lutz, came back to win on the turf at Belmont in her next start with a really nice speed figure. So I think that was a legitimate race. And furthermore, Well, I have some questions about her trying the dirt for the first time. I was looking up the stats for her sire in DRF Formulator. Super speedy, a horse that we don't know a whole lot about if we follow just American racing. But he was a dirt horse during his career. And even though he's been a sire up in Canada whose progeny have mostly raced on synthetic, if you look up his stats in Formulator, it gives a rundown for his statistics on all different surfaces. And what jumps out at me is, the average for all sires winning dirt sprints among their progeny is at a 13% rate, and Super Speedy's progeny win dirt sprints at a rate of 32%, which just kind of jumps off the page, so much higher than how he does on any other surface. So clearly his best progeny have run on synthetic, but I think that gives some hope that maybe Miss Speedy can handle the dirt. And if you look up Mark Cassie's stats, he's a trainer that's really difficult to find positive stats for because he has so many horses. A lot of them run fairly often. It doesn't seem like there's always a master plan with some of his runners. Nothing against Mark Cassie. I like trainers that run their horses a lot, but that's just the way that he handles them. But synthetic to dirt has always been a really strong move for Mark Cassie. And when he does it with horses that have won their last starts, he's 7 for 24 over the past 5 years with a 443 ROI. So I just think there are enough stats pointing in that direction to say Miss Speedy might run well here. She's got to overcome a pace though, because there is other speed in this race, so she's going to have to work out a trip, but I thought she'd be a decent price. So that's where I landed. Michael, anybody else that you wanted to mention in this race?
Yeah, I'd have a couple other ones that I wanted to just touch on real quick, but that is an amazing stat. 32% on dirt sprints. That's got to be one of the highest numbers that you guys have ever seen on a sire with win percentage on a certain type of race. So the two others that I want to touch on, and Craig mentioned one of them, is Caramel Swirl. That's the other one that I would use pretty prominently with obligatory off that 3-wide trip against the Goldest of Gold Rails at Charlestown. And then the other one that I wanted to get your take on, and it may be this horse may be the filler that you alluded to when you talked about this race a little bit ago, David, is the 12 Just Read It, because he's 50 to 1 on the morning, or she's 50 to 1 on the morning line, but her races as an early season 3-year-old, her speed figures as an early season 3-year-old were about the same level as a lot of these horses were running when they were that age. And Ray Handel could have run this horse in an N2X up in New York for probably about 75% of the purse, but ships down here to run here. I think it's just a little interesting that she runs here, and she's also shown that she could stalk and pounce in a race where there's a little bit of speed. So maybe not for the pick 5 purposes, because I don't know how much of a win candidate she is, but for verticals, maybe Just Read It just is a little bit interesting coming back as a later season 3-year-old.
Look, I'm not going to talk anybody off 50 to 1 shots because those are the kind of horses that can make your year if they come in. I will say I'm a fan of this filly, but not because of her form, because of the way that she looks. If you see her on the track, she's just one to watch out for because she's got this really cool looking star on her forehead. It's just something you rarely see. It's kind of formed in like a perfect lightning bolt. I think if she was a colt, they probably would have wanted to name her Harry Potter or something like that because it's just really striking when you see her. As for her form, though, I don't know that I quite think she's this good. That Cicada Stakes that she won to close out her early season campaign, I just thought that was kind of a weak field. But look, she's going to be a gigantic price of this race, so I'm not going to try to talk anybody off her. In a pick 5 kind of sequence, she's the kind of horse that you can use as a distant backup. And if you're right in the other races and she comes in, that's definitely going to make it a juicy payout.
Just one thing I want to add. I get the impression all three of us are kind of dismissing the grade 2 prioress. We've barely mentioned Super Sensational, and we haven't mentioned Scylla at all. I don't like the race in particular. If I had to pick one out of that race, I would pick Super Sensational. Just think she had a worse trip and was probably a little bit better, but I just didn't like the speed figure out of that race personally.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you, Craig. I thought that Super Sensational's run better in some of her prior races. I thought that she was in position to win last time, and she was kind of supposed to seal the deal, and she just wasn't able to hold off Scylla, who was kind of resurgent, coming back on her. Scylla's a cool horse. She never gets any respect at the windows. She just continues to run well, but I think she's stepping up to face a tougher field than she met in the prior race. Let's move on to the final leg of this Pick 5 sequence. It's going back to the turf, an allowance none others of one other than going a mile. And I'll start off with this one to give my opinion before I throw it to you guys. I don't know. If I was making the morning line in this race, I think I would have handled it a bit differently, because when I went through, I feel like the number 6, Santin, is going to be favored, and it's not going to be that close. I feel like he should be 8-5, 9-5 in this race, if not lower. It's just a field where we've seen a lot of these horses already. We kind of know what they are. Most of them aren't that good. And Santin is just kind of the new face that, to me, jumps off the page. If you go back and watch that debut at Indiana Downs, I mean, he got some pace to close into for sure, but he always traveled really strongly in there. And once he got out into the clear at the head of the stretch, I mean, he just motored home. The runner-up in there, he's no superstar, but I mean, he's good enough to confirm the high speed figure that the race got. And I just think that this Brendan Walsh trainee might actually be pretty good in a nominators one allowance, where I feel like the others have just kind of proven that they're a little so-so. And Santin, I'll just add, he's got the pedigree to back it up, because his dam, Sentiero Italia, she was a really good horse for Godolphin and Kieran McLaughlin during his training career. I think she was grade 1 placed, won a couple grade 2s on the turf. So it just feels like there are a lot of arrows pointing to Santin in this race, and I don't think I'm the only one that's going to see them. I feel like he'll be a short price. Michael, did you agree with that take? Because, I feel like we're just not going to get much of a price on this horse.
Yeah, David, we seem to be on the same page in a lot of these races. I think Santin will be bet down off the 5-1 morning line. And I saw the same thing with the pedigree and the visually impressive nature of that debut. And I'm a big Brendan Walsh fan. I think he does a lot of great work across the country. And the second time on the turf is a good angle for him. The only other one I would want to use is the morning line favorite, Pine Knoll, just because he's been in pretty good form since being transferred over to the Brad Cox barn. His win against at Ellis was over Orchestration, who came back as a Chad Brown trainee, who came back to win at Saratoga, improving his TimeformUS speed figure. And then last time out at Kentucky Downs, I don't think he got the right trip. He was kind of in a 3-wide speed duel, and he was the only one who was left around when they entered the stretch. The winner, Newsworthy, came from last. And when I was watching the replays for Newsbreak, who was another horse as part of that pace duel, he ran on opening day at Keeneland. I was like, wow, Pine Knoll actually stuck around. I hope that horse runs back soon. And sure enough, he shows up here. And so I actually wonder a little bit, and this is a question I'll pose to Craig, if that TimeformUS speed figure pace adjusted might actually be a little higher, since there were timing issues with that race, and just based on the flow of that race, and with it kind of coming apart at the seams at the end, whether that 109 TimeformUS speed figure that he got could be a little bit upgraded. And if it is, then that puts him well above a lot of his counterparts in this race.
Yeah, you make a good point. There's really no way we can time the races at Kentucky Downs. I time them from video, but that's only from the gate to the wire, and we have access to what the real run-up is. So I have a lot of confidence in the final time figures, but when it comes to the pace part, you kind of have to look at the race flow, as you mentioned, and the race flow sure seems to indicate that the pace was fast. Most of the horses that were up on the lead were nowhere to be found at the end, including some horses who actually were pretty good. It's not like they were rank long shots. Newsbreak is one of them. So I would agree. Maybe he ran even better than what the chart says. And for that reason, I basically am on the same two horses you guys are. I think even though it's a big 12-horse field, we've used the word filler a couple times, and I think we have a lot of that in here. So I landed on the 6 Santine and the 10 Pine Knoll. My one worry about Pine Knoll is he's going to have to work out a trip from that 10 post if we don't get any scratches, and we often don't get a lot of scratches at Keeneland because people want to run here. So given his forward position, that might be a little tougher to work out for him. So I prefer the 6, but I'm using Pine Knoll as well, and that'll be about it for me. I'm only going to go too deep in here.
Yeah, hearing you guys assess it, I feel like I might have underrated Pine Knoll a little bit when I initially looked up the field for that race at Kentucky Downs last time and kind of looking at the horses that finished around him towards the front end in that race. I felt like it was one of those Kentucky Downs races where, the speed figure, I mean, it makes sense for the time the horse ran, but I feel like the winner and the second place finisher, it just seemed like the number was a little high for them. But you make a good point about them getting the right trips in those races, whereas Pine Knoll probably didn't and was, the survivor of that, what seemed like a fast early pace. So I think he is one that makes a certain amount of sense here. He just doesn't exactly have that winning profile, but I guess Brad Cox has a way of getting these horses to win. I mean, none of us mentioned the number 5, who's the grade 1 placed horse in this field, Ginsburn, coming out of that Bruce D Stakes. Did you give him any look, Michael, or you just kind of think that was a fake grade 1 last time?
Yeah, I hope you were using air quotes when you said grade 1 place, David, because that race was grade 1 in name only. And if you use the TimeformUS race ratings like I do, it was no higher than any of these allowance races that the other horses have been running in. But that being said, he is a lightly raced runner, and Rusty Arnold points to this meet, and so he could certainly improve. And has more upside than a lot of the other ones, but I just think that stakes-based placing might have his price drop down a little bit off the 5-1, and I think Santon and Pine Knoll are both pretty talented. So I might use as a backup if all 4 of my other opinions are right, but not on the A line with the other 2.
Yeah, my distant backup in this race, and I say distant, I mean he'd be a C if in a race where I guess Santon would be my A, would be the number 7 Wing Commander, who was just kind of wide the whole way last time behind Camp Hope, a horse that kind of put in a breakout performance earlier in the meet, and a horse that if he continues to run that well might be great at stakes quality. And I wouldn't put too much stock into this trainer switch from Neil Howard to Shug McGahee. If you saw the reporting, Neil Howard is actually now working as the assistant for Shug McGahee's Kentucky String, so I would imagine that this horse is actually still with Neil Howard. Wing Commander is just one that I think might be subtly improving, but he's going to have to run better. And if the horse that I believe is going to be favored here, the number 6, turns out to be the real deal, he could have a tough time winning this race. To wrap it up, let's just go through the sequence again very quickly and talk a little bit about how we construct our tickets. Michael, I'll start with you. I sometimes like to use the DRF ticket maker just to put something in and see, what it spits out, how expensive it's going to be, just to get a quick sense of it. For this one, when I put in my ticket, I was surprised to find out that it actually came back a little bit less expensive than I was anticipating. But, how would you put this together, and which races would you kind of emphasize certain horses?
Yeah, I think kicking it off in the first leg, I would want to use the 4 Mystic Knight as an A, along with the long shot I highlighted 20 twice, and then also using Candy Tycoon with that pace advantage, probably as a B type. And then in the second leg, race 7, I would really want to have a lot of my money going through Pipeline with Cool Quest and Runaway Magic, the backup. So that would be 6 on the A line and 8 and 9 as backup. And then the third leg is where I think you really need to spread, and that's probably going to be the case for a lot of people. So you lose some of the value from following the crowd, so to speak. But like I mentioned earlier, like Beat Levon, English B the 6, Spectacular Gem the 9, and then I would have Big Agenda as a backup, just because I have some other prices in on the A line and other legs that if they're right, then I wouldn't want to have him completely knock me out. And then Obligatory and Caramel Swirl would be the prominent ones in the 9th race. That would be the 8 and the 13. And then with Just Read It as a distant backup to try to blow up the pick 5 payout. And then to close it out, I would have Santon and Pine Knoll on the A line with Ginsburn, the 5, as a distant backup. And the other thing to note about the pick 5 at Keeneland, and when you play it using the ticket maker where you have multiple tickets, is they also pay 4 of 5 in the pick 5 at Keeneland. So if you're playing the ABC ticket maker method, you're kind of, if you hit it, you're gonna undoubtedly have a bunch of 4 of 5 that kind of sprinkle in some extra breadcrumbs on the payout for you. And if you miss it, you also likely probably have a 4 or 5 to recoup some of your investment. So that's another benefit, at least at this track, of playing the ABC method is you set yourself up for some 4 or 5 paybacks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. Craig, how did you put this one together?
We're not too far off. In the first leg, I'm going to use Candy Tycoon and Mystic Knight most prominently, and then that one horse 20 twice as kind of a seahorse. But if he gets in there, I don't want to be knocked out in the first leg. In the Perryville, I'm going to focus on Pipeline while also using Cool Quest and Runway Magic. And that's about it, but Pipeline would be my A-type horse. Definitely spreading in the 8th like everybody else, I would imagine. Though I would have a couple A's in there. Mr. Dumas. He might actually be my only A, but I'd have a bunch of B's. The Closers, Hierarchy, Argentello, Beat LeBone, who I know that horse is going to be a price. I'd be surprised if he's actually 30-1. People are a little bit smarter about these Euro shippers than they used to be in the old days. And Spectacular Gem, the first time gelding for Brendan Walsh is one I would definitely have on my ticket as well. In the Raven Run, I'm going to focus on Caramel Swirl and Obligatory. They would both be A's. And then you've convinced me over the last couple days I have to use Miss Speedy in this spot. So she would be one for me. And then the 10th, I'm going to keep it kind of narrow with the 6-horse Santine and the 10-horse Pine Knoll.
Yeah, I don't think we're that far off here. Maybe just emphasizing some different horses throughout the sequence. The first leg was the toughest one for me to make decisions about, and I'm kind of still going back and forth about it after hearing you guys talk about this race. I made the decision to emphasize Candy Tycoon as the only A in this race, and it doesn't sit that well with me because I don't love this horse. I'm just kind of going with that likely pace advantage he's going to have. But I do think that Beau Luminary is a contender, Mystic Knight's a contender. I don't want to leave those horses out, and I do want to use a horse like 20 Twice as a distant backup. For me, he'd be kind of a C in this wager where Candy Tycoon is the A, but I'm still kind of working it out. Even a horse like Bourbon Calling, I might want to have in there somewhere like as a C. But I don't want to go too deeply into that race because there are some places to spread later on. In the 7th, I'm leaning mostly on Pipeline and Runway Magic. Soup and Sandwich would be the main backup for me in that race. In the 8th, I would use a bunch of A's, including Beat LeBone, Mr. Dumas, Argentello, and then I would use some backups like Busy Channel and the number 1 Hierarchy. The 9th, I would focus primarily on just Miss Speedy and Obligatory. I really want almost in my entire weight to go through those 2 horses. Caramel Swirl, I hear the points that you guys made. She's a backup for me. I'm not as in love with her as you guys are, and Super Sensational, the same thing. And then the last race, my only A is going to be the number 6 Santin. I'm going to go to the horse I believe will be favored in that race, and kind of lean somewhat heavily on him. I'll probably upgrade Pine Knoll a little bit to a B, and then my C's would be a horse like Wing Commander, who I think could be a much bigger price in there. So that's how we put it together from the ticket construction standpoint. Hopefully we gave out some good opinions on this show and had a little luck. And Craig and Michael, especially thanks to Michael for coming on. I thought it worked well having the 3 of us give our opinions. And, even though we agreed a little bit, I feel like we're able to cover these really interesting, difficult races from a few different angles. So Michael, thanks for coming on the podcast this week.
Of course. Yeah. And the fact that we agreed on it, that's not a bad thing. It just means all 3 of us are going to hit it.
Well,
great having you on, Michael. Appreciate it.
Well, Craig, I know you'll be back with me next Tuesday when we recap these races on the TimeformUS Pacecast. We'll obviously talk about both stakes at Keeneland and some other races that take place around the country, including those 2 turf stakes in New York that if you want to check out Craig and I's opinions about those, we covered those as stakes previews that you can find on DRF's YouTube channel as well. So stay tuned for that TimeformUS Pacecast next week. Remember that you can always listen to both of these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.